What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are going to be working on a 2020 BMW 330i xDrive. Today on the G20 behind me, this is a B48 4-cylinder turbo equipped car. We are going to be covering a complete coolant refresh. We're going to be breaking up this series of videos into 6 videos. 1 going to be the radiator replacement, 2 the heat module, aka your thermostat, 3 your water pump and pulley, 4 is going to be the oil cooler / oil filter housing, 5 will be your expansion tanks for both the low temp and high temp circuits, and 6 being the serpentine belt and tensioner. All right, for the focus of today's DIY, we are going to be looking at the water pump replacement. As you may or may not know, modern day BMWs are going back to a mechanical water pump, starting with the S55 and newer. So this B48 is no different. It's going to have a mechanical water pump. The pump also comes with a new pulley. The seal is already pre-installed. Think of it as a really nicely laid out piece of RTV that comes pre-installed from the factory, something to look at before you install it into the vehicle to make sure it is in good shape. Otherwise, you're going to have to reseal it. These can last anywhere from 60 to 100,000 miles. They are traditional in the sense that they have a weep hole built into them. When that weep hole starts to leak, that's a good indicator that the pump is on its way out. Of course, that's not accounting for leaks from the pump to the block as well. These are a little buried, not horrible on the B48. So if you really get in there with a flashlight, maybe remove the acoustic cover in the front, you can really inspect it without having to take the car apart too much. Again, about 60 to 100,000 miles. Because we're going to be in there doing the pump, you'll also see us working on the side at the serpentine belt and tensioner. It's just one of those things. While you're in there, you're going to want to replace, especially at a higher mileage point. And you're also more than likely going to get coolant all over your serpentine belt. So you might as well throw a fresh one on there while you're doing that. But nonetheless, I digress. Let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. So for this DIY, we have a large pry bar, self-explanatory. We have a low value torque wrench. This is a 3/8 drive ratchet and 1/4 inch drive ratchet. We have a couple sockets and adapters to go with those. Sockets wise, we have 18, a 16, a 10, an 8, and a T30. A couple different sizes for all of those. Again, small adapter. We have a locking pin. That's going to be for our belt tensioner when we loosen that up to get the belt on and off. We have a trim removal tool and a rivet removal tool, as well as some pliers, which are going to help me personally with the PCB lines coming off of our air intake and all that good stuff. You can probably just use your fingers and pinch, but my main hand is out of commission, so these pliers are going to come in handy for me. A couple different pick tools and small flathead screwdriver. We have a paint pen. We have a vacuum fill tool for our coolant system. That'll be part 1 of the 2 steps involved in making sure the system is filled and bled. We have some electric tools, pack gun and ratchet, some brake clean. Not pictured here, but needed is going to be obviously a bucket to mix your coolant in, a catch pan for your old coolant, and if you're going to be using a U-view like this, air compressor that you can run that with. I have a small pancake one at home, and that's more than capable for that, as well as some shop towels. Like anything else with a DIY like this, be sure to watch it all the way through. Make sure we don't add any new tools, and if we do that, you can note them before you get started at home. There's going to be a lot of overlap with the 6 videos that we're filming all at the same time. So you may see one part that's already out or something that's missing. We'll try to cover that as best as possible. And if there was some noted tool for that as well, we'll drop that throughout the video. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right. To get started on this series of cooling system overhaul, replacement, whatever you want to call it, our first step for all of these is going to be to disconnect the battery. We're going to undo the negative terminal first, 10mm socket. All right, we'll tuck that baby down, and just as insurance, we'll do the positive terminal as well and let it sit to the side. If you want to be extra safe, you can put some towel or something in between these so they don't make contact. And then just so we don't forget, we are going to either put a towel or just put the trunk liner back in, sticking out so that no one closes this trunk, making it harder to get to the battery when we're done. All right, continuing on from battery removal, again, we're going to be draining both circuits, whether you're just doing the expansion tanks or you're doing the oil filter housing or the water pump, whatever it may be. We're still going to cover how to drain the entire system, since we're going to have to fill either one or both at some point, depending on which video you are watching. But next on our list of things is going to be to remove the caps to the expansion tanks. Obviously, this should go without saying, but you're only wanting to do this on a nice cold system. This car's been sitting in the garage overnight and prepped for today, so it's nice and cold. Last thing you want to do is burn yourself or damage the car. All right, with these two caps off and out of our way, something that can come off now is also our beauty cover. This just lifts up and you can set it to the side. All right, at this point, we are getting a bit closer to draining the high temp and the low temp circuit. In order to get the high temp circuit drained, you can go about it two ways, but both are going to require the removal of the air intake. One is going to be to undo the auxiliary pump, which we will be doing, also removing one of the lines coming off of the water pump itself. And that's going to drain most of that side of things. The other thing would be, again, to remove this whole air intake box and silencer, then remove the fan, and you can get to the lower radiator hose, of course, once you remove the skid plate underneath. So you can tackle it either way you like. We'll show you both. Before I get it into the actual draining, though, we are going to remove this air silencer / air box intake system here so that it's out of our way for all of the following videos that we're working on. All right, we're just going to work our way around our air box here. We have an electrical connector here that we're going to undo. With these, you want to free up the little gray tab, just unlock it. Little flathead screwdriver, nice and gently works. Then you can press on the tab and pull back. If you need to, you can use the flathead to pry and release that. You'll see there's a little alligator clip here. We're just going to pop that off of the intake here using a little flathead. These can be a little bit stubborn if they've never been off before. I have to switch over to a pick tool. But this is going to be a common theme throughout this DIY. There might be wondering, what DIY? All of them. And then for now, we'll just pull it back and tuck it somewhere over the valve cover. From here, we have another alligator clip that rides onto the top of our silencer. We just need to free that one off of we'll call it the airbox assembly. All right, that can stay loose for now. If you can see right next to that, we have another little gray connector here. We're going to release that baby up. Following this line, we're going to go to this PCB line right here. We have two ridge sides to this connection that goes on top of our valve cover. We're going to pinch on both sides and then lift the line off. There we go. I just use these pliers. My right hand is out of commission, so I'm a little limited to what I can do with my left hand, but squeezing these two tabs helps release that. As we pull out this whole thing, I think what we're going to do here is disconnect our plug on top of our turbo here. And that's just going to help free up this harness so that we don't have to really worry too much about bending things around to clear that as we pull out the airbox. So this will give us a little bit more working room. Again, just a little gray lock there. Once it's out, press down, pull that baby back, and this can swing up here as well. That'll be out of our way. Still have another PCB line to undo. You're going to see the one up top here. There's another connector actually at the bottom. That's what's going into our intake. So we're going to release it from down here. Squeeze both sides, same thing, and then try to pull up and release. I'm going to come from the passenger side. To give us a little bit more room to see exactly what we're breaking here, we're going to undo this flathead clamp and just separate the airbox from the rest of the intake. It's going to make our lives a little bit easier. Thread this baby back together, and we'll throw that back on our airbox once we pull it out. These are just held in by rubber grommets. You can pull it out as a whole and then set this to the side. Now with that off, we can see a little bit better what we have going on. Here's that vacuum line down here at the bottom. These clips are toast just from touching them. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna release the feed from the turbo. You can see just a little bit on the top, part of that quick disconnect clamp similar to the coolant lines. You can also see it underneath the diverter valve. Take a peek from underneath. So now we're gonna release the clip going to our turbo from the inlet, and that way we can try to pull this whole assembly towards us a little bit and get that last PCV line out. It's okay if this flings off, just don't forget to reattach it after the fact. Now we should be able to pull this back. If it's still hung up, then more than likely your clip is still doing something, in which case you can continue to remove it or pull it off the rest of the way. I'm gonna reach in there for 1 sec. Now we're gonna squeeze these two together again, do our best to try to get this line off. Although these tabs are cooked from living so close to the turbo, we might have to replace them, in which case we will drop that in the video description below. Right, and with that, we can pull this assembly out, giving us way more room to not only the fan and the coolant lines going to the radiator. Once we get this charge pipe out of the way, though, we'll have room to our water pump, our serpentine belt, all that good stuff over here on this area. So let me set this to the side and we'll go on from there. So on the quest to drain our high temp circuit, we have our charge pipe here, which you can see now clearly goes down here. So we're gonna undo that clip similar to the one we just did at the turbo inlet. We have 2 electrical connectors. Then we have a couple Torx holding this on to the throttle body. So let's start with the electrical connectors. We'll disconnect those first, and then we'll move on to the Torx, then the clip at the bottom, and we'll pull this baby out of our way. We have 3 T30s. I'm gonna start blasting these off. Here's our bottom one closer to the alternator, the extended T30. Pull back, gentle pull back, and look at all the room that gives us. I'm gonna set this baby to the side, and then we'll go from there. All right, at this point, we are almost ready to start draining the side of the high temp circuit, again, via BMW's instructions by the auxiliary pump here and our main water pump. Before we do that though, the reality is most of the coolant is just gonna drip down the front of the block, over our steering rack, subframe, all that good stuff, which is fine, we can clean that up. There is no drain petcock on this system that you can just go from underneath and release, unfortunately. That's something that they kind of have done away with on these models. So what we're gonna do before we do anything else is remove the lower skid plate so that our coolant can go straight through to our catch pan. We will also remove the lower driver's side, if you will, like belly pan, part of the fender liner. That's gonna give us access to the coolant line for the low temp circuit. Let's get underneath, too much talking. Skid plates, maybe we'll just rip the low temp circuit while we're down there, and then we'll go from there. All right, to get us started, we have 10 8mm for the center shield. Then we'll move on to the one on the driver's side. Removing that one actually gave us access to our low temp circuit line, which is excellent. So you don't really have to worry too much about this side, but we still do need to get this plate off, which is why we removed this front one to expose our hardware. So with that, let's blast this baby out of here. All right, we have 9 18mm bolts holding in this bottom shield. Let's zap these babies out. All right, with that panel removed, now that's gonna open up all the area here for our coolant to kind of trickle its way through. Before we get back down on the ground though, let's take advantage of being up here with the hose here for our low temp circuit now, and we'll go ahead and pop that out. We'll drain it. Once it's done draining, we'll plug it back in, and then we don't have to worry about it. Again, if you want a little bit more room to work with, there is 3 more 8mm here at the front, and you have another 3 here on the inside of the fender liner holding on this cheek. But I think we should be fine. Our clip is right here. So let's get our catch pan. Again, lid is off of the expansion tank up top. Let's get that baby drained. First, we're gonna release the clip to our coolant line. I'm just using a small pick to get in here since it's a little tiny spot. Small flathead would work too. All right. And then this is the part where we take a shower. So we're going to position our catch pan as best as we can and then work this line off. There we go. Man, that took a whole 25-inch pry bar to free up that hose. That's how stuck these O-rings can get. All right, we're gonna let that do its thing. We'll let it drip, and then we'll come back and plug it back up. With our low temp system drained, we're gonna pop our hose back on, then I'll throw the clip back on, but that will be good for the low coolant or low temp system. So we'll throw a clip back on there, and then we'll be good to rock and roll. All right, with that part of the system drained, now we're gonna head back up into the engine bay. We'll get a lower catch pan for our coolant for the high temp circuit underneath the car, and we'll go from there. All right, next on the list is gonna be removing our auxiliary pump. For those of you just doing the serpentine belt DIY, you can simply undo the clamp and just swing the pump out of your way. But for everything else, we are draining the cooling system. So again, we're gonna continue on with the high temp circuit now, starting at the auxiliary pump. So we're gonna move that out of our way in full. So if you're just doing the belt and tensioner, you can just unplug the electrical connector and then swing the pump out of the way. We have our catch pan situated down below. Now we're gonna get our coolant line here. I'm just gonna pop this baby up. Same as the other lines we've been doing. So you'll see this magenta coolant coming out of our system. This indicates that your car more than likely has been at a dealer for a repair. And between BMW switching from the blue coolant to the green coolant, at one point the dealers were having to use this magenta pink stuff. And that was like a good way for them to keep track of, what's been through the dealer network for a repair versus not. So more than likely this was in for something, whether it was warranty work or post-warranty work. This car has had a rough previous life. So that's just something to note. We're gonna be filling this up with green, but totally compatible, just something funky in the old BMW world. While that's still draining, we're gonna do the other line here. All right, we're gonna let this drain for a little bit and then we'll come back up to removing the rest of the auxiliary pump. Next, we'll undo our little electrical connector. We have a 10 mil down below holding the clamp together for this auxiliary pump. And then that pump can come out. We'll leave the bracket with the pump, and I'm gonna throw the 10 mil nut bracket here so that we don't have to guess where that goes later. And then we'll probably fight with it later when we're dealing with this hose. All right, moving on, you can see on this little damper cover, this little resonator cover that we have on the front of the engine block, we have a couple more alligator clips here. We're gonna release these so that when we pull this cover off, this harness can kind of do its own thing. So there's one. We have one more here. I'm just gonna open up this baby here. The other thing we can probably do is just pull the rivet out of the cover here, but sometimes that can rip too, depending on how old the stuff is. Let's see if we can, no, that one's putting up a little bit of a fight. So I'm just trying to split this clamp open here. Just easier said than done. There we go. All right. Wonderful. We have one more alligator clip that goes to the lower auxiliary pump here, and down below you can see the connector for it. I don't really think this will be in our way, but just for sake of filming and giving you the best view, we're going to go ahead and undo it. So let me separate the alligator clip off the auxiliary pump first. And then if we follow that down, we'll see our electrical connector down below. I'm going to unlock that gray tab as carefully as I can. Now with that, we have a couple expanding rivets to remove to get this little cover off. So let's work on that next. I'm gonna use a little 5-head screwdriver to try to pop these babies open. You can use rivet removal pliers, which we have, but I mean, again, you don't have to add more tools than already needed to this list. Let's just keep it nice and simple here, shall we? We have a third one hiding behind the auxiliary pump that we just did the electrical connector from. It's gonna be a little bit sneaky to record, but it is there. In the sky. I'll get that one after. We have one more here on the bottom corner. That's going to be right down there on the bottom left. All right. Here's a better view of that cover. We had rivet 1, rivet 2, 3 behind the auxiliary pump, and 4. We're gonna clean this up, set it to the side, but now we have a way better view. And before we get too carried away here with the high temp draining, you can take a look actually. And right behind that coolant hose, you'll see a lot of dried pink stuff here. So either it had a leak at one point, or it's just starting to leak enough where it's only starting to get a little bit coated here. I don't know, we'll have to see once we get this hose out. But next, to continue with the high temp draining, high temp circuit is gonna be this clamp here. So let's get ready for that. Now to finally drain the high temp circuit, we're gonna undo what is essentially the lower radiator hose. We're gonna pull that clip out and then see what our luck is at pulling this hose off. All right, with access to our water pump pulley now, the next step is going to be to crack those 3 T30s free just a little bit before we take off the belt. The belt's gonna hold the pulley from spinning. And then once those are cracked free, we can remove the belts and then remove the pulley the rest of the way, getting to our pump. So let's do that first. You don't want to remove them all the way, obviously, otherwise it's going to shoot off or damage something since everything's under load from the tensioner still. So with that, we're going to grab our 16 mil socket on our ratchet, detension, pulling towards us, towards the driver's side. And then we'll just pop the belt off of one of the pulleys, and then it'll be completely loose. Now, at this point, you can just tuck the belt away out of the side. If you've been watching some of the other videos, you'll have noticed that this clamp is loose down here, 10 mil nut that we removed to free up the auxiliary pump. That would allow you to pull the belt off in full. Let's pretend you are replacing it while you're doing this. Then you slide it out. It's a little bit more in detail in the belt tensioner and serpentine belt replacement DIY. And then we'll set this baby to the side. Just make sure if you're reusing the belt that you install it in the same orientation it came out. All right, now with that out, I'm going to continue removing the rest of the water pump pulley, and then we'll drain a little bit more coolant. With our T30s loosened up, I'm just going to zap them out the rest of the way. Now we have a better view of the rest of our pump. We have this one coolant line which runs around the front. A couple of things with this line. You can replace the line as a whole, or you can just replace the O-rings. But you have to do one or the other when you take this off of the pump. You can't just pull this off and expect that O-ring to survive reinstall without leaking. So those will be linked in the video description below as well if you want to do the whole hose, which has new O-rings on it already, or you want to replace just the O-rings. So we're going to make sure that our catch pan is positioned correctly underneath, and then we're going to go on by removing the T30s that hold the hose from this end, as well from the water pump, as well as the cylinder head. So let's get ready for that next. All right, we're going to start with the 2 T30s on the water pump side. Again, just pretending that maybe you're only going to do it from this side. This is what this would look like. Just these 2 babies. Let's remove them in full, and then we'll pull the hose out. There's probably going to be more coolant that's going to dump out of here. So that's why we have the catch cans prepared underneath. Now we should be able to pull this hose off. You can see there's our old O-ring totally stuck to the water pump. These are a square profile. This one is not horrible. I wouldn't reuse it though. It's starting to get a little hard. Let's set this to the side. Let's get the other end of the hose off again. We're replacing the whole thing. There we have a T30 up top here, one more at the bottom. Let's zap these babies out. And this is actually kind of interesting. You can see the ridge here on the hose, or on the plastic fitting of the hose. There's half of it that's completely gone. Again, this car is a 2020. It's not that old. But this is very similar to like the Mickey Mouse flange on the E9X chassis, or N52, N54, N55s, where they just literally fall apart. So any longer and this would have probably failed, which is why I'm replacing the entire hose, not just the O-rings, because it's plastic, it's brittle, it's coming right off the cylinder head, it's gonna get hot, and it's right by the turbo. So something to keep in mind. Let me take this off, set it to the side, and then we'll continue on with the water pump removal. We have 5 T30s holding out our water pump, 2 up top here, 1 over to the side, and 2 on the bottom. Let's zap these babies out. So you can see that gasket on here, it's literally just one-time use. It's just a silicone bead, and once it's smushed, it is smushed for good. Otherwise, the impeller still is in pretty good shape on this one. Again, this car is only had about 78,000 miles, I think, at the time of teardown. I can see very minimal, there's no way to show this on camera, but the slightest amount of coolant down in this orifice here. We pull over here, looks good. So this was still okay, but again, not a bad idea to replace as preventative maintenance. All right, we're gonna set this old pump to the side, clean up our block a little bit, get some of that coolant off of our bracket here in our auxiliary water pump, and then once everything's nice and clean, we'll get ready to install our new water pump. All I did was put a towel here in the opening, the main opening to the block, just to block anything from spraying in. For this surface, because of the type of sealant that's on that pump, it doesn't really leave any residue behind. So if you don't have to disturb the surface, the sealing surface at all, then it's best to just wipe it down and leave it and install your new pump, which is exactly what we are going to do. Oftentimes you'll see us take a light Scotch-Brite pad, but that's typically with a more traditional gasket that leaves a lot of marks or residue behind. Not the case here. So we're just gonna give it a nice wipe down, make sure it's nice and dry and clean, and then we'll feed in our new pump and torque it into place. We're gonna feed our new pump in, again, making sure that the seal on the pump is in good shape. If it isn't, you're gonna have to reseal it. There is a special part number for what BMW recommends. But this one's nice, ready to rock, straight out the box. Let's put this baby back in. There's a little dowel that helps line it up into the block. It's only gonna go one way. Once it's in, it's not gonna spin or move or anything on you. So I'm gonna hold that in like so and get at least 2 of these bolts started on opposite ends, just snugged up so that the pump doesn't fall off of its dowel, and then go from there. All right, I'm gonna grab the torque wrench. We're gonna torque these down in a kind of a crisscross pattern, just top, bottom, left, right, as best as we can, all the way to 8 Newton meters. All right, now we're gonna get ready to reinstall our coolant hose. Again, we have a new one, but before we do, if you take a little glance over here on the cylinder head side of things, you'll see a problem, and that is that our old O-ring is still in there, as well as a little bit of plastic debris. So super carefully, I'm gonna get this plastic out before we forget. Use a little pick and grab this plastic very carefully. Try to get it out. Yeah, there we go. It's exactly what we want. You don't want this floating around in your cooling system, or it is going to jam up a pump, an auxiliary pump, break something, cause a leak, anything. This O-ring needs to come out. Our new hose has a new one. We're going to do a little bit of cleanup on aisle 5 before we feed that hose in. If it's super corroded in your situation, a little bit of a Scotch-Brite pad will go a long way in cleaning that up. I think we can just clean that up with some brake cleaner and a shop towel. We have our new hose ready to rock and roll. I have a little bit of dielectric grease on the O-ring. It makes any O-ring going into a surface like that less likely to roll over or pinch, which is what we want to avoid. Our other end has its new O-ring already installed. That one's just going to sit flush against the water pump. We're gonna feed this into place, get the T30s back in, and then we'll snug it down. There we go. Once that baby feeds in, it's gonna hold itself up. And then let's get these T30s started by hand. Now with them snugged up, those 5 get torqued down to 10 Newton meters. A little bit different than the water pump. At this point, we're gonna get our new water pump pulley started. We'll get the T30 started by hand, snug them up as much as we can. Then we'll throw the belts back on, let the tensioner do its thing, and then tighten the water pump pulleys, all the water pump pulley bolts all the way. Now we're gonna feed our new water pump pulley on. Just get that resting on the end of the pump. Torque spec for these T30s is going to be 8 Newton meters, not a whole lot. Now we're gonna feed our belt back on. So again, whether you remove the auxiliary pump to feed it through the bracket or just have it hanging off to the side, either way is going to work. All right, what we're gonna do now is just show you really quickly how to lock the tensioner. It'll make it a little bit easier if you're working by yourself. We're gonna take our locking pin. There is a BMW part number for the pin, but if you've done tensioners in the past, you may have some of these lying around, or you can use a tiny drill bit to lock it in. Right now we're gonna lock our tensioner. So to show you that, we're gonna put our 16 on, pull it all the way until it stops. Following the bottom of the tensioner or the alternator pulley, there is a little hook here on the face of the tensioner, and it's gonna allow you to feed the pin in to the back side of the tensioner, which will lock it. So now you don't have to fight it while you put on your belt. Just gonna go over our crank pulley, over our AC pulley, over our alternator pulley. Just make sure that the grooves are in the right spots. So we go underneath our alternator, underneath our water pump. All right. Now with that nice and lined up, we made sure that it's sitting perfectly over the alternator pulley, the crank pulley, and the AC compressor. Once we're happy with that, we can go ahead and release the tensioner. Let me double check the AC compressor. Oh yeah. 16 millimeter wrench or socket on a ratchet. Release that baby, pull the pin out. And now we are tightened back up. All right. With that, our water pump and water pump pulley and that coolant line are officially in and ready to rock and roll. From here, we're gonna start buttoning things up. We're gonna get our auxiliary pump buttoned back up. The one down below, that's just a 10 millimeter nut. That's not gonna be in the way of anything else moving forward, even for the other videos that we're doing. And then from there, we have a radiator hose, which we had off for the radiator replacement. Pretty straightforward. We're just going to plug that back in. We'll get our upper auxiliary pump back in, the clamp back on, lines hooked back up. And then from there, we'll get our auxiliary pump back in with the lines, electrical connector, charge pipe and throttle body can go back in, and then we'll button up the intake. So not too bad. The main part is over with. So for that, let me bolt up this auxiliary pump down below and go from there. All right, we're gonna secure our lower auxiliary pump once more into its little plastic housing. I had threaded the 10 mil nut back onto the stud earlier so that I didn't lose it. So I'm gonna take that off. And you can see the latch is going over the stud. I'm going to reach in for a moment, get that 10 mil nut back on, and then we'll snug it up. All right, now that we have that baby situated, we can reattach our lower radiator hose back onto the pipe coming out right beside our water pump. Same thing, a little bit of lube on that O-ring, it's gonna go a long way. These are gonna go to our auxiliary pump, which before we throw that baby on, let's go ahead and get our acoustic cover situated back on. All right, we're gonna feed our acoustic cover back on. One thing to note, if you're coming off of the oil filter housing DIY or a heat module. We went back off camera and rotated that engine a bunch more times just to reprime what we already primed, just as cheap insurance. It costs you nothing but a few more minutes of time to get that baby bled back up. So just something worth noting before this cover goes on. We're gonna get our 4 expanding rivets started. Get those babies lined up. There's 1. 2 is gonna be behind these lines. Just why we keep the auxiliary pump out and out of the way. 3 is gonna be in the lower left corner. So there's the rivet there. Then we're gonna push it in. And then 4 down below our lower auxiliary pump. A little bit tight to see, but you can just get in there. All right. With that baby in, let's get our auxiliary pump bolted back up to the bracket, and then we'll clip in the lines and the electrical connector for it. Just taking off the 10 mil that I situated on here before. We're gonna get this baby on, back over its stud, get that 10 mil nut back on. And let's snug up that 10 mil with the electric ratchet once more. Both of these coolant lines can get plugged back into the pump. There's 2. We have our auxiliary pump electrical connector, which we had swung up over here. That's gonna come back down and plug in to the bottom of our pump, right up front there. All right. Alligator clip off the pump bracket right here. This line runs off the front here on this little clamp. And then this guy was also clipped to the acoustic cover right in front of this lower coolant line. So pretty straightforward, just keeping everything nice and tidy. Oh, you know what? This is gonna have to run behind the 2 coolant lines. So I'll pop those off really quick and we'll feed the line behind it. And then we can hook those coolant lines back up. No big deal, it'll take 2 seconds, but that's why taking photos and that kind of stuff when you take things apart will go a long way. While we're here, we can also plug in the auxiliary pump. All right, we're gonna get our charge pipe back in, get that fit in here underneath the turbo. There we go. Hear that little click. And these are locked in. Give it a little bit of a twist. Helps heat that O-ring. We're gonna lock this baby up over here. This is gonna key in to the throttle body so that it sits in proper, and then we'll get the 3 T30s started. I'm just gonna use the 1/4 inch ratchet to give them a gentle snug. Torque spec for these T30s are 8 Newton meters, not a whole lot. So we're just gonna give them a little cinch. I'm taking this car right back apart after this video, but 8 Newton meters if you wanna put a torque wrench on it. We have an electrical connector here and an electrical connector here that we need to plug back in. This one can go in right here. You'll see that most of these wires kind of rest in their natural spot of where they wanna be. Let me get this one right here. Alligator clip. All right, let's continue on with the next few bits. All right, we're gonna feed in the silencer portion of our box. This goes right into the turbo inlet. Before we click that baby all the way in, I'm gonna get that evap line situated onto here first. Beautiful. So plug this baby in. Let's wrap this underneath these other 2. Okay, beautiful. Now we can click this all the way into the turbo. Give it a couple pulls, make sure it's not gonna come out. We'll hook up that other evap line up top in a little bit. All right, let's take care of our diverter valve. That one's gonna run through the front here of this evap line. Click that baby in. That's gonna bite down on this air box right there. This can plug back into the valve cover. like so. All right, that's locked in down there. We have one more evap line that runs from the vent valve, or it's a two-piece vent valve and the intake manifold down to the inlet feed by the turbo, so we can clip those babies in next. Here is our old one that we pulled off, and you know, the top one is in pretty good shape, the one with the sensor on it still, but we do carry all of them individually, so we bought both of them, and I'm going to join them here. That one's good to rock, and then we'll hook them up. Let's hook them up over here to the turbo side of things first. We have our electrical connector right here. All right, that baby's all situated. Now let's get the other part of our airbox in. It's easier to feed these grommets back into the strut tower than to try to install it with the airbox. So if they came up with you, just take them off. All right, this baby is nice and situated. Let's get it plugged back in. That's gonna be this connector right here. Lock that baby in. Alligator clip right here. Boom. All right. At this point, we have our negative battery terminal to hook back up. We'll get that cowl cover in. We'll get the weather stripping in. Then we'll hop underneath. We'll button up the bottom skid plates. And then what we all came for. All right, let's get this negative terminal situated. And this aux battery. We'll tuck the windshield washer line back into that little channel and this channel. That's going to be good to rock there. Now we're going to get the hood seal back on, being mindful of this cable, which we will then feed back onto the hood seal. Let's head underneath. Let's button up those shields, and then we'll come back up top and get the battery situated in the trunk, and then we can move on to filling and bleeding the coolant system. All right, we had ended up taking out this corner shield just to give you a better view of the low temp circuit coolant line that we drained from, to drain the cooler from. So we're gonna throw that one back on first, a couple 8 mils, then we'll move on to the middle piece and then the rear half, and we'll be one step closer to being done. All right, let's switch over to the torque wrench. And these 18 mils get torqued to 56 Newton meters. All right, now let's get the last bit of plastic shielding in, and we'll head back up top. All right, they're all started. I'm just gonna snug them up real quick, and then I'll meet you in the trunk. We'll get the battery hooked back up, and then we'll fill this baby up. All right, it has come time to fill our cooling system. We're gonna be filling the low temp and high temp circuit. Total capacity for the two systems combined is just about 14 liters, 9.8 for the high temp, 4.1 for the low temp. Again, that's assuming that they are fully empty. We didn't crack the block anywhere, so there's probably gonna be a little bit of coolant there. So we have enough coolant if we were doing these from a completely dry fill. We have 2 gallons of HT12 concentrate and 2 gallons of distilled water mixed together. We're gonna fill these both up, and then from there we'll talk about how to run the bleeding procedure. They're pretty similar for the low temp and high temp circuit, with the exception of the high temp requiring the engine to be ran. So we'll kind of go over that. We'll start with the low temp, see if both systems are being bled with the electronic pumps, and if not, we'll still cover the high temp circuit per BMW. So first things first, we have our U-View tool ready to rock and roll. We'll start with the high temp circuit, fill that up, and then we'll move to the low temp, and then we'll talk again about the bleeding and go a little bit more in depth. All right, we have our air hooked up. We're gonna get that valve closed, and we're gonna pull vacuum. I like to use a towel around the breather valve here. Sometimes it can mist out whatever's in the system, and you don't wanna get coolant all over the place if you don't have to. And we're gonna try to hit about 25 on our gauge. Once we pull vacuum to about 25, we're gonna let it sit for a minute or two, just to make sure we have no leaks. It's totally normal to see the coolant lines starting to collapse on themselves, which is exactly what you want to see. What you don't want to see is that needle dropping after you have stopped. That means you have a leak somewhere. So let's hope to avoid that. All right, we can see the upper radiator hose is totally collapsed under that AC line. Just peeking underneath the air box, I can see the lower one is totally folded in on itself too. That's exactly what we want to see. Our gauge is staying perfect. It has not dropped the hair, which also means that not only is our cooling system not leaking, but our tool isn't leaking too. That can be a big problem if the tool is bad that you're using. I'll let that sit for a minute, and then our next job is going to be to ensure that this feed line always remains at the bottom of your coolant bucket. If at any point air goes in there, it's going to totally kill the process. It's going to allow air into the system. You'll have to drain and do this again. So let's try to avoid that. So yeah, I'll see you in a minute, and then we'll go from there. All right, what I'm going to do first might be a little bit overkill, but it's something I like to practice here. I'm going to keep my line submerged. I'm just going to fill the bleed tool or prime it first. So I'm going to open that, let the coolant hit the valve, close it right away. We'll pull vacuum for another 5 seconds, and then we'll open it in full. So now the system's primed. Let's pull vacuum for another minute. All right, now we're going to open that valve, keeping this line fully submerged, and we'll stop once it stops pulling coolant. All right, at this point, our tool is done feeding our high temp circuit. You can also start to see some air here in the line, which is totally fine. We're going to lift this up and move over to our low temp tank. We have 1.75 gallons, so just under 2 gallons of coolant left, which means this took just over 2. We have again a total capacity of 4.1 liters for the low temp circuit, so just over a gallon. So we have more than enough coolant here to take care of that. All right, same thing. We're going to pull vacuum on this. We'll prime the line, and then we'll let it fill. Now it's been sitting. Gauge is good. Let's prime this line once more. All right, now I'm going to open up the valve, keep the line at the bottom, and just make sure we don't run out of coolant in our bucket. All right, at this point, the low temp has stopped taking in coolant. We're going to remove our air, line off of the tool. We're going to close the valve, open this up gently, and then we'll open up the valve and let the coolant back into our bucket. This we'll throw back into our BMW containers. We'll write on them that they're mixed, so we know they're good for topping off or filling this car up. Once we get all cleaned up, then let's pick it up with the bleeding procedure. We'll cover both of the procedures for the high temp and the low temp circuit, and then we'll start with the low temp circuit. All right, for the high temp and low temp circuits, you want the expansion tanks at the min level. There's a yellow circle inside that shows your max. It's a 2-step bit. The top is your max, the bottom is your low. You're gonna wanna set both of them to low before you run the bleeding procedure. We have the low temp circuit set already. I just pulled some coolant out of the high temp circuit. We're gonna put the lids on. I'm not gonna close them fully just yet, because while we run the low temp circuit bleeding, I wanna see if anything's actually happening to the high temp circuit. Regardless, we're gonna run the high temp bleeding procedure right after the low temp one. So with that, let's hop in the car and let's get this thing going. All right, so let's talk about the bleeding procedure really quick and how the low temp and high temp circuits differ a little bit. Again, this is all per BMW. The goal here is that we're going to be putting the car in a service mode, basically. So using the start stop engine button, we're going to hit that 3 times quickly with our foot off the pedals. And then from there, the key to keeping the car awake long enough to run the bleeding procedure, which is about 11 minutes, we're going to have to turn on the low beams and the hazards at the same time. That'll keep the ignition from turning off and cutting the bleeding procedure short. It helps to have a battery tender on your battery, especially if your battery is a little bit older during this whole process, as 11 minutes is a bit of time and you do have lights and hazard lights running at the same time. Once the hazard lights and the low beam lights are on, we're going to make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. We're going to turn our temp setting on the on the heater controls here to the highest with the fan setting to the lowest. Once we have those things taken care of, we're going to hold our foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we should audibly be able to hear the auxiliary pumps engage. At that point, the service is just going to run for about 11 minutes, again, which is why we recommend you put a tender on that battery. Once that's done, then we can go back into the expansion tank, check the level, and set the low temp cooling circuit to the full line. Now, where things get a little bit different for the high temp circuit, I have a feeling that both water pumps are going to actuate for both circuits. However, per BMW, to properly bleed the high temp circuit, we're going to do all of the mentioned previously. We're going to set low beams on, hazard lights on, temp to the highest, fan speed to the lowest, foot on the accelerator pedal for about 10 seconds. And then from there, we're going to start the car. We should see a service function on the dash that's saying in service mode, and it's going to run the car and control the RPMs for the next 11 minutes, keeping it at about 3,500 RPM. So it's important that the car is in park on the ground, tanks are sealed up, hood is closed as if you were going to drive almost, and then just let the car do its thing for about 11 minutes. From there, you're going to want to let the car fully cool down, or at least below 50 degrees Celsius, so that you can open the cap safely and check the coolant level there. So again, a little bit different. Once we get the low temp circuit bleeding, we're going to hop over to the front and just take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through the low temp circuit expansion tank, and then see if we see anything on the high temp side as well. I have a feeling both are going to run, but again, high temp requires the engine running. So let's start with the low temp cooling circuit first. And for that, we're going to start stop engine 3 times quickly. We're going to turn on low beams. We're going to turn on our hazards. We're going to set our temp to the highest. We're going to turn that off. We don't need that. That's fine. We're just going to point through the center vents. We're going to turn our blower speed down as much as possible. All right. I'm going to make sure that the car is not in Eco Pro mode. I don't believe it is. Now we're going to hold the throttle pedal for about 10 seconds. On the dash, we have service function started. And now we let the car sit for about 11 minutes. Again, tender's on. Let's hop up front and let's take a look and see if we can see the coolant flowing through that low temp circuit tank and maybe something out of the high temp circuit. For the high temp circuit, we're going to do exactly the same once this procedure finishes for the low temp, except after we do the throttle pedal for 10 seconds, then we're going to start the car. So I'll see you in a little bit again when we go to do that. We don't have anything happening just yet, but we did hear the auxiliary pumps actuate a second ago. Here we go. You can see coolant flowing on the low temp side. Do we have anything over here? Nothing on the high temp. It's not a bad idea to keep an eye on this. If you need to top it off a little bit to keep it at that low level, you can. As long as there's coolant in the tank and something for there to flow, you're going to be fine. All right, so with that, we're going to let the 11 minutes lapse, and then we'll pick it back up and do this again, but for the high temp circuit. And again, just to reiterate, nothing is happening with the high temp system right now. There's no coolant flowing, which means we are going to have to follow the separate procedure for the high temp, which requires starting the engine. So I'll see you in about 11 minutes, or a second for you, I suppose. I don't know, grab a snack or something if you want.
11 minutes later.
At this point, our 11 minutes are up. The low temp circuit is looking great. I need a splash of coolant, and that's going to hit the max mark. Once I get that done, we're going to throw the cap on that. We're going to throw the cap on the high temp circuit. Just taking one last look at where the level is right now. Put the cap on it, and then we're going to initiate the same procedure again, plus starting the car, letting it run for 11 minutes. The car is going to do its own thing from there. And then once that's done, we'll turn the car off, let it fully cool down, and we'll top off the coolant level as needed. All right, now we're going to do the high temp circuit bleed. Hood is closed, car is on the ground, we're in park, all 4 wheels are touching the ground again. We're going to do the same thing, start stop engine 3 times, hazards, low beams, temp on high, fan on low, accelerator pedal for 10 seconds. Then we're going to start the car, and we should see a service function started on the dash, at which point the car is going to control the RPMs and go from there. High, fan on low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One more for insurance. Start the car. Service function started. That's exactly what we want to see. From here, we're going to let the car run for 11 minutes. That's the length of the bleeding procedure. The car is going to control the RPMs. They're going to drive up as high as 3,500 RPM and so on and so forth. When the service is done, it's going to drop down back to idle. And it's worth mentioning that because the car is running, you don't really need the tender at that point. The car is going to be charging. However, we're going to leave everything else as it is. The hazards on, the low beams on, the door open, and just let the car do its thing. Catch you in 11 minutes. All right, with the water pump back in, we have the intake back in, everything's buttoned up. We have the coolant system bled. That is going to conclude this DIY for today. Again, a little bit involved, really just a lot of little connectors and plastic bits that need to come out of the way, but the actual mechanical water pump being pretty straightforward with a lot of room to work with, unlike the N52, N55 era cars with the fan shrouds having to come out and all that other stuff. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you'd like to see more videos like these or the other 5 in the series, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.